I didn't have time to respond because the slap came so quickly. As 130 guests watched in quiet, my glasses flew and broke on the opulent ballroom floor. My cheek was burning, but my chest hurt far more. On her wedding day, my daughter-in-law Juliet had just smacked me because I wouldn't give her the keys to my apartment. She yelled, "That's what you get for being so selfish," at me, in front of everyone. A woman your age doesn't need so much space. The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, to pick up my broken glasses. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves, but no one, absolutely no one, dared to defend the poor old mother-in-law who had just been publicly humiliated. My son Ethan stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Juliet continued, smoothing her sparkling wedding dress. "Ethan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her remarks were full with venom. I had put up with her patronizing remarks about my shabby clothes, my ancient car, and my unremarkable existence for months. However, this had gone too far and ought never to have been done. I cautiously stood up, sensing that every eye was on me like jagged daggers. Even though I was crying, something inside of me had altered irrevocably. It was more than simply a physical slap. It was the last straw. I had maintained a low profile for years, leading a modest and private life. Not even my own son was aware of my secrets. As I carefully made my way to the exit, memories of the previous few months started to flood my head. I recalled Juliet's initial visit to my apartment 2 years prior. When she saw my little kitchen, my outdated furnishings, and my modest house, her face sank. She had asked him, seriously, "This is where Ethan's mom lives," in a voice that was just loud enough for me to hear. Every visit had been a silent torment ever since. She advised me, "Aura, you should move to a smaller place," at a family meal 3 months prior. "At your age, you can't maintain such a big apartment. Besides, Ethan and I are thinking of having kids soon. We'll need more space." Her fake smile didn't fool anyone except my son, who seemed to lose his personality whenever she spoke, acting like a puppet on a string. The humiliations had escalated gradually. First, it was the comments about my clothes. "Aurora, don't you have anything more modern to wear?" Then, it was about my car. "That car is so old. It's dangerous for you to drive that." Next, it was my part-time job at the local flower shop. "I don't understand why a woman your age is still working instead of relaxing." Each phrase was a small poison dagger stabbing at myself. My name is Aurora Hughes. I am 68 years old, and all my life I have been a woman who prefers discretion over ostentation. I work at a small flower shop 3 days a week. I drive a 10-year-old car. I buy my clothes at discount stores. To the outside world, especially to Juliet, I am just a middle-class widow living on a fixed income. But that's exactly the image I have carefully cultivated for decades. What none of those people looking at me with pity knew was that my life had been completely different before my husband passed. My husband, Robert, had not been the office worker everyone believed. We had made a conscious decision to live modestly, to keep our true wealth a secret, to protect our family's privacy in a way that I now understood had been prophetic. As I walked out of the ballroom, the guests' conversations followed me like a toxic cloud. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," whispered Juliet's aunt. "The bride is right," Ethan's cousin went on to say. "That woman should be in a retirement home, not living alone, because she can't take care of herself anymore." Another visitor made a phony, sympathetic remark. It felt like acid being poured on exposed wounds with every syllable. The oppressive heat in my chest stood in stark contrast to the chilly air conditioning throughout the ballroom. I scrambled for my cell phone and my battered black purse, my hands shaking. My daughter-in-law would obviously never comprehend that. I had worn a pocketbook for 5 years not because I couldn't buy a new one, but rather because I had come to appreciate functionality over style. Since I had foolishly believed it would never be needed, I dialed a number I knew by heart and hadn't used in more than a year. "Aurora here. Carlos, I need you to come right now to the ballroom at Royal Oaks. Yes, at this very moment. Bring the documents that you are aware of. They need to know the truth now." Even though my voice was shaking, it had a hardness about it that I hadn't felt in a while. "Mrs. Hughes, are you certain?" Carlos's voice was professional but worried as he asked. "There is no going back once we take this action." The last time I looked back, I saw Juliet smiling with her friends in the ballroom. probably telling them how she had put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Ethan was at her side, grinning feebly and displaying no regret at all for what he had just seen. The answer was, completely sure. I hung up the phone and marched resolutely toward my car, saying, 30 minutes, Carlos, no more. I was going to take off the mask I had put on to keep my family safe for the first time in years. They were going to meet the genuine Aurora Hughes for the first time. They would then realize the true meaning of the word regret as reality struck their idyllic fantasy worlds, with streetlights creating lengthy shadows between the automobiles. The parking lot was silent. I waited for their lives to alter forever for half an hour, while I sat in my ancient sedan. It took them half an hour to realize that they had humiliated the woman who had been secretly caring for them more than they could ever have imagined, and that this was the biggest mistake of their life. Memories of how I got to this point started to pour into my head like an unstoppable landslide while I waited in my car. When Ethan first arrived at my flat with his anxious expression, it had all begun precisely 2.5 years ago. I had known him since he was a boy. He'd said to me, "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special." And there she was, Juliet, with her fine clothing, her hair done to perfection, and that grin that stopped short of her eyes. I could tell right away that something wasn't right. I could tell everything I needed to know about her plans from the way she surveyed my place, assessing each area with hardly concealed contempt. "How cozy," she had murmured as she looked at my second-hand furniture and my sun-faded curtains. Her tone suggested the opposite. Ethan, completely blinded by what he believed was love, didn't notice the condescension in her voice. That first dinner had been a silent disaster. Juliet barely touched the food I had lovingly prepared, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked her about her family, she gave evasive answers, but not before asking me about my financial situation with a curiosity that I found alarming. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Aurora? It must be difficult to make ends meet on so little money," she had remarked with a phony sense of worry. But Juliet was unaware that I had been watching her just as intently as she had been watching me. I started to see trends over the course of the following several months that made me extremely vigilant. Whenever they came to my flat, she would comment on how old everything was, and how I should have a better place to live in my old age. However, her gaze was constantly focused on the important elements: the building's excellent location, the expansive view from my balcony, and the room sizes. I heard her talking quietly on the phone in my kitchen one day when Ethan was in the restroom. "Indeed, Mother, his mother's flat is located in a very affluent neighborhood. We could remain here till we obtain a place of our own. Because she is so innocent, she will most likely even express gratitude to us for assisting her in the change." Even though her remarks were like a scalpel to my flesh, I remained calm when she came back into the living room and seemed to be innocent. Every conversation we had with Juliet after that was a meticulously planned performance by both of us. I acted as the helpless elderly woman in need of direction, and she played the frightened daughter-in-law, worrying about her mother-in-law's welfare. On the inside, though, I was learning, watching her behavior, and figuring out why she did what she did. It resembled a chess game in which we both believed we were winning. Her attempts at manipulation gradually increased during the ensuing months. Then there were the subliminal hints. "Aurora, I've seen several beautiful residences that are maintenance-free and offer all-inclusive services for individuals your age." Then the more overt pressures arrived. "At your age, you cannot continue to live alone. It's risky. What happens if you fall and nobody notices?" For days, the purpose of every dispute was to make me feel weak and incompetent. My own son, Ethan, started repeating the same words like a parrot. "Juliet's right, Mom. Perhaps you could think about relocating to a more manageable location." It hurt more than any outright insult to watch him slowly become that woman's puppet. I was now viewed by the son I had nurtured with so much love and effort as a hindrance to his happiness. Following their engagement announcement, the psychological assault grew more intense. Both the frequency and the tension of visits increased. Juliet had begun delivering senior community brochures and real estate peer. "Aurora, I'm just looking into your possibilities." As if it were a business discussion, she would arrange the documents on my coffee table and say, "I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible." However, I had been researching on my own. I made the decision to give an old friend who worked in real estate a call one afternoon while they were out running wedding-related errands. "I need you to look into something, Amelia." What I saw shook me to my core. I told her, "There's a couple who are very interested in my apartment. and I want to know more about their real financial situation. Ethan and Juliet were deeply in debt. The whole expense of the wedding they were organizing was covered by personal loans and credit cards, totaling over $50,000. Due to non-payment, the apartment they were renting was about to be evicted. They couldn't afford the payments on the fancy cars they drove. Their way of life was a facade supported by crippling debt. Things began to make sense. The pressure to relocate, the hurried marriage, and the incessant remarks about my financial This pair had not been brought together by love. It was their urgent need to resolve their financial issues, and their lifeline was my apartment, which was situated in one of the city's most upscale neighborhoods. The realization was like a kick to the gut. My kid, whom I had instilled with the ideals of integrity and diligence, had opted for the convenient route of deceit and manipulation. Instead of viewing his own mother as a person deserving of love and respect, he had let an ambitious lady persuade him to view her as a resource to be used. They made increasingly forceful attempts in the weeks before the wedding. Juliet had told me, "Aura, you can't keep being so selfish." 3 days prior to the ceremony, that night, I made a decision that would alter everything. "Ethan and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." Her words no longer even wore the mask of fake concern. It was a direct demand disguised as a family favor. Carlos, my financial advisor, and the one person I had fully trusted since my husband Robert's passing, was the first person I called. "Carlos, please get some paperwork ready. I might soon have to divulge knowledge that I have concealed for years." At once his tone had grown solemn. "Are you certain this is the appropriate moment, Mrs. Hughes?" As someone who had managed my affairs for over 10 years, he had cautioned me with prudence. "You cannot retract this information once it is made public. Family ties may suffer greatly as a result." However, I had already decided. The family I had chosen to keep quiet about had decided to turn on me. And now I knew the time had come. As I sat in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Carlos to appear with the papers that would make all the difference. After another 25 minutes, Juliet, Ethan, and all the other guests who had viewed me with sympathy would learn the truth about Aurora Hughes. Their ideal universes, which are based on deceit and greed, would fall apart like sandcastles in about 25 minutes. Shadows danced under the lights as the night breeze rustled the tree leaves in the parking lot. The fact that so many illusions were going to perish forever on such a lovely night was almost poetic. I had been on the phone with Carlos for 20 minutes, and every minute seemed to drag on forever. I could see the ballroom's brilliant lights from my car, and I could hear the happy music and laughter coming from the open windows. The idea that jubilation would become a nightmare for the key participants in a matter of minutes was unreal. I closed my eyes and let my thoughts to be filled with the most agonizing recollections of the last few months. I had to recall why I had come to this irrevocable point. The worst embarrassment had occurred during what Juliet had described as a crucial family gathering. 2 weeks prior to the wedding, as part of a well-planned ambush, she had come to my flat with both her parents and Ethan. "We would like to discuss your future with you, Aurora," Juliet's mother had started, a sexy woman who treated me like a troublesome insect. Juliet's father went on, "We think it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life." He was a big man who had looked around my place like a real estate assessor. "Living alone in such a large space at your age is not only superfluous, but also risky. What if your medical emergency goes unnoticed for days?" Their statements were too well practiced to be impromptu. Throughout the conversation, Ethan had kept silent, just sometimes nodding like a skilled puppet. It was like seeing the death of the sun I had risen when I saw him seated there with the family, who viewed me as an impediment. At last, he said, "Mom," in a voice I had forgotten. "They're correct. After some discussion, Juliet and I have decided that moving to a location that is more suitable for your age will benefit everyone." I repeated, feeling the rage building inside of me. "Adequate for my age. And who has the authority to determine what is suitable for me?" "You," as if my statements validated what they had already discussed. Juliet's mother and her husband exchanged a knowing glance. "We know that can be hard to accept, Aurora, but you need to consider what's best for Ethan and Juliet. What's in their best interest," I muttered as I started to realize the full scope of the plot that had been hatched behind my back. I guess my apartment would be the ideal place for them to begin their married life. I only needed the uncomfortable stillness that ensued after I asked the inquiry. Every aspect of this discussion, every disagreement, and every psychological strain had been prearranged. At that point, Juliet took charge and used all of her emotional manipulation skills. Aurora, your well-being is more important than the apartment. After much investigation, we have located a fantastic home for individuals your age. It offers cooked meals, social activities, and medical services around the people who are sympathetic to your situation might become your pals. I felt sick from her phony smile. What am I experiencing? I pretended to be perplexed as I asked, Juliet, what specifically do you think I'm going through? Before responding, she glanced at Ethan for reassurance. Well, loneliness, worry about money, and the fear of not being able to care for oneself. Aurora, it's typical for your age. You don't have to feel guilty about asking for assistance. I briefly lost my words when this 28-year-old woman told me what was typical for someone my age. I became cold, though, when I noticed something in her eyes, the unwavering conviction that she was entitled to my life, my house, and my choices. She no longer saw me as an autonomous individual, but rather as a barrier that needed to be eliminated with the least amount of opposition. We've run the numbers, Juliet's father said, removing a folder that they had obviously prepared beforehand. The monthly rent for the house would be about $2,000. You would be able to pay for it for many years after selling your flat, and you would have some money left over too. Well, aid Ethan and Juliet with their first marriage-related expenses. The environment. It has nothing to do with my safety or well-being. It has to do with money. They wanted to support their unsustainable lifestyle by turning my house into cash. And even though I already knew the answer, I asked whether I could decline. Aurora, Ethan said in a practiced tone, we hope that further harsh steps won't be required. The underlying danger was obvious, though. If your mental state worsens to the point where you are unable to make sensible choices, I would be declared incompetent by legal means if I didn't participate willingly. They had done their homework. They had a plan. They had set up shop so they could, if needed, seize everything I owned by force. Sitting there, letting others threaten his own mother, was the son I had reared with so much affection. I cried for the first time in years that night, after they departed, after I firmly refused. Not because I was unhappy, but rather because I was finally letting go of the false beliefs I had about my family. I had given Carlos a call right away. I had sobbed as I told him, I need you to look into something immediately. I would like to know the precise financial status of my son and his fiancés, everything, liabilities, income, debts, everything. That investigation's findings had been disastrous. As a sales manager, Ethan made $45,000 a year. But he owed over $80,000 in credit card debt. Juliet made about $4,000 a year working part-time as an image consultant, but she spent her money like she was an executive, including the debts they had taken out for the wedding. Their total debt was over $120,000. They were 3 months overdue on their rent. For the $2,000 per month flat, 60% of their total salary was used to fund the payments for the cars they drove. They had begun utilizing cash advances to settle other bills, and their primary credit card was fully charged. My apartment was the one thing that could save them from their financial collapse. However, Carlos's report contained another item that had devastated me. Ethan had been contacting banks and insurance providers on a regular basis for the previous 6 months to inquire about loans secured by his aging mother's assets. He had been inquiring about the legal processes involved in obtaining a financial power of attorney for elderly people. For months, my own son had been organizing my methodical eviction. The report's conclusion contained the most upsetting material. Juliet had been telling her acquaintances that she had sacrificed herself by becoming engaged to an older, less beautiful man since his mother had valuable estates and no competing heirs. According to a private investigator Carlos had hired, Ethan's marriage didn't feel like love to her. In my estate, it was a calculated investment. The last straw had been that revelation. For weeks, I had contemplated just telling them my actual financial circumstances in the hopes that the shock would cause them to rethink their actions. However, after reading that report, I realized it had nothing to do with desperation or money. It was about my son becoming corrupted to the point of being unrecognizable by sheer, premeditated avarice. The days before the wedding had been agony. Every time Ethan called, I felt more pressured to change my mind. Juliet made nasty remarks about my selfishness and intransigence throughout every visit. I was now being treated as though I were already an elderly, senile woman whose views were irrelevant. Ethan had tried one final time the night before the wedding. The most significant day of my life is tomorrow, Mom. Please don't be difficult and destroy it. Juliet only cares about what's best for us all. The last piece of evidence that I had lost my son permanently had been his remarks. The guy I had reared with so much love and sacrifice was no longer the man who was getting married the next day. And as I waited for Carlos in my car, I came to the realization that everything had culminated in this moment. It had nothing to do with cruelty or retaliation. Justice was at issue. It was to demonstrate to them the repercussions of their behavior. Teaching them that some boundaries should never have been crossed was the goal. Everything would alter permanently in only 15 more minutes. As I dialed the number for my 70-year-old neighbor from the flat next door, Joseph, who had silently observed all of the stressful encounters over the past few months, my hands shook. "Joseph, it's Aurora. I need to ask you for a very important favor," I said, my voice shaking. "Could you go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk?" "Yes, right now. It's urgent." Joseph had been like a brother to me since Robert passed away, and I knew I could trust him without him asking questions. While I waited, I remembered the conversation I had with Joseph just a week earlier. He had witnessed from his balcony when Juliet arrived with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. "Aurora, that girl brought a man with a briefcase who was measuring your apartment from the outside," he had told me with obvious concern in his voice. "When they saw me, they left quickly. I don't like what's happening at all." Joseph had been the first to notice the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior over the last few months. "Your son doesn't greet me like he used to," he had observed. "He used to stay and chat with me when he came to visit. Now he rushes in and out as if he's ashamed of something." His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Joseph for contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property titles, investment records that Robert and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow, living on a modest pension, was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Joseph appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Aura, what's going on? You look very upset," he asked as he handed me the documents. "It has to do with Ethan's wedding." I explained briefly what had happened in the ballroom, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always knew it." "Joseph, in a few minutes, a man named Carlos will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here," I asked. "And Joseph, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you have always been like family to me." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. "Your family, to me, to Aurora. Do what you have to do." As Joseph returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to review documents I hadn't looked at in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $5,400,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated monthly rent of $50,000. The third was the deed to a beach house I had bought as an investment 10 years ago. Robert had been a genius at investments, starting with a small import business and turning it into a silent empire. Together, we had made the decision to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family security. "Visible wealth attracts problems," Robert used to say. "Invisible wealth gives you power." I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each document in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked to stay active and connected to the community. The old car I drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because I had learned that unnecessary ostentation only brings problems. My apartment, the one Juliet so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I had bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Ethan and Juliet. For the last 3 years, since my son had started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming out of my account. The special discount on his rent that he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Ethan knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The luxurious apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had been made possible by my secret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was financing his transformation into a person I didn't recognize. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $4,500 that had kept the sinking ship of Ethan's financial life afloat. Money, he thought, came from work bonuses or tax refunds, when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his irresponsible decisions. The irony was devastating. While Juliet was humiliating me for being an economic burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage. While they were planning to strip me of my apartment to solve their financial problems, I had been solving those problems in secret for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the ballroom once more. The lights were still shining, the music was still playing, the guests were still celebrating, but in less than 5 minutes, Carlos would arrive with the final documents I needed. In less than 5 minutes, the process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son. I had tried to protect Ethan from reality for too long, and that protection had corrupted him until he was unrecognizable. Headlights of a car approached the parking lot, illuminating the night with a white light that momentarily blinded me. It was Carlos, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything forever. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling how each step took me further away from the Aurora I had been, and closer to the woman I needed to become. Mrs. With a legal brief under his arm, Carlos remarked, "Hughes, are you quite certain about this? Once we go in there, there will be no way to undo what is about to happen." I looked toward the ballroom one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their victory over the useless old woman they had just humiliated. I have never been more sure of something in my life, Carlos. It's time for them to meet the real Aurora Hughes. Carlos opened his folder under the parking lot light and began to show me the documents he had prepared with his characteristic efficiency. "Mrs. Hughes, here is the order for the immediate suspension of all bank transfers you have been making in Ethan Hughes's name," he said, pointing to the first paper. "Also, here is the notice of cancellation of the lease agreement that you had confidentially guaranteed. The landlord will receive this document tomorrow morning." I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread that I had carefully woven for years to protect my son. And now I was cutting those threads one by one. "And the payment for the ballroom?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Cancelled," Carlos confirmed. "The deposit you had guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They will have until tomorrow to find an alternative form of payment." The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Ethan and Juliet's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had all been made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was going to withdraw all that support definitively. "Carlos, I want you to understand something," I said to him as I signed each document with a determination I hadn't felt in years. "This is not cruelty or revenge. This is the only way for them to learn the real value of things. For too long, I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Hughes," Carlos replied with genuine respect in his voice. "In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I have seen many families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you are doing requires more courage than most people possess." His words gave me the final strength I needed to take the last step. We walked together toward the ballroom entrance, and with each step, I could feel my heart beating faster. It wasn't nervousness I felt. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to regain. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of as a resource to be exploited. The music stopped abruptly when we entered the ballroom. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, and I could see the confusion on the guests' faces. Some recognized Carlos immediately. After all, he had handled the financial affairs of several prominent families in the city for decades. His presence at social events usually meant that something important was about to happen. Juliet was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Aurora?" She shouted at me from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing for photos with Ethan. "You already left once." That was enough drama for one night, wasn't it? "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlos said in a clear, professional voice, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson, There was such a deep silence that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Some guests pulled out their cell phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Ethan slowly approached, his face pale and his eyes full of confusion. "What's going on here, Mom? Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" he asked me, his voice no longer as confident as it had been when he had humiliated me minutes earlier. "Ethan," I replied, my voice firmer than it had been in months. "This is Carlos Jones, my financial and legal advisor." I could see his hands shaking a little as he fixed his tie, a nervous motion he had had since he was a child. "He has come to deliver some documents that I think you will find very enlightening." Carlos opened his folder and took out the first document. "Mr. Ethan Hughes, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately cancelled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All the color drained from Ethan's face. "Financial guarantee?" he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already knew. For years, he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he had chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been uncomfortable. "Also," Carlos continued relentlessly, "the monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother had been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. Credit card payments, auto insurance premiums, and any costs you thought were being paid for by other sources are included in this." Juliet gasped, causing the ballroom to reverberate. "That's not possible," she cried as she rushed toward us, her wedding gown sagging on the ground. "Ethan's mother is not wealthy. Take a look at her lifestyle. Take a look at her automobile and clothes. She is an elderly woman who receives a pitiful pension." Her hysteria was obvious, and a number of guests started talking among themselves with a growing interest. Carlos took the final document out of his folder and said, "Finally, the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been cancelled. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight." His words hit the ballroom like a bomb, and I saw some guests start to tremble as they started to head for the exits. Ethan felt the realization strike him like a hammer. "You," he whispered, his eyes staring at me, unable to comprehend what they were hearing. His voice trembled on the final line. "You've been all this time. You've been paying for everything." For a brief moment, I saw the frightened and defenseless little child he used to be. I confirmed, "For 3 years, Ethan," in a voice that seemed oddly composed following the emotional upheaval I had been experiencing. "For 3 years, I believed I was assisting you during a trying period. I thought you would get better and grow up to be the man I brought up throughout those 3 years. I hoped you would keep in mind the ideals I instilled in you during those 3 years." Juliet clutched her head more desperately and started to pace in circles. "This isn't possible. This isn't possible." The guests observed her with a mixture of morbid interest and fear as she wailed. "You're an elderly lady in poverty. You are employed in a floral shop. Your vehicle is 10 years old. Money is impossible for you." Finally, after decades of meticulous performance, I said, "Appearances are deceiving, Juliet, because my husband and I felt that outward affluence brings trouble. I made the decision to live simply for years. As it happens, we were correct. The issues simply appeared when we least expected them to." The music had ceased altogether, and the only sounds in the ballroom were the nervous breathing of the newlyweds and the increasing muttering of the guests, who were starting to realize that they were seeing something wholly different from what they had been expecting. Knowing instinctively that this story would become an urban legend, some people had already started recording on their phones. "Mom," Ethan whispered in a weak voice, "please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just money or financial support. He had lost his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 35 years. "The only way to fix this, Ethan," I replied, "was not to break it in the first place." The silence in the ballroom became deafening. 130 guests held their breath as they processed what they had just heard. Juliet stood motionless for the first time all night, her eyes darting between Carlos, the documents, and my face, as if trying to find. Ethan just stared at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of shock, belated comprehension, and absolute horror. Mrs. Carlos's voice was loud enough for everyone to hear him say, "Hughes, do you want me to continue reading the complete financial information?" His query hovered over the newlyweds' heads like a blade. I noticed that some of the visitors were getting closer as they watched the drama play out in front of them. "Please, Carlos," I said with a calmness I was unaware I had. Juliet tried to interrupt with a frantic scream, but Carlos held out a hand and went on with the dexterity of a surgeon doing a delicate operation. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Carlos started looking over his documents during the past 36 months. A total of $162,000 has been transferred by Mrs. Aurora Hughes to pay for her son Ethan Hughes's and his fiancée's living expenses. This comprises $18,000 for auto insurance, $22,000 for other expenses, $48,000 for rent, and $44,000 for credit card payments. The ballroom was filled with a collective hum. A few visitors looked at each other in surprise. Others checked the numbers using calculators on their phones. With a pale face, Juliet's mother, who had stayed at the head table during the altercation, reluctantly rose to her feet. In addition, Mrs. Hughes personally insured the whole cost of this celebration, which included the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography for $53,000. Carlos persisted unrelentingly. "Funds that are no longer accessible to pay for these costs, as I previously stated." When Juliet did manage to speak, it was more of a wail than a solid sentence. "This isn't feasible. It's untrue. Nobody can live like a pauper and have that much money." As though seeking encouragement, she turned to the guests, but all she saw were awed expressions and some who were obviously amused by her plight. I responded, "My dear Juliet," with a composure that stood in stark contrast to her panic. "A very important lesson about evaluating individuals by their appearances has just been imparted to you. Because my husband, Robert, and I preferred seclusion to ostentation, I lived simply for years. It proved to be a really smart choice." At last, Ethan responded, stepping tentatively toward me. "There must be an explanation. Mom, please. There must be a solution for this. You simply cannot ruin my life in this way." When he finished speaking, his voice broke, and I briefly hesitated due to a twinge of mother agony. "Destroy your life?" I asked again, feeling my rage rising once again. The reality of what I said reverberated throughout the ballroom like church bells. "I'm ruining your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who watched helplessly as I was humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to take away my home?" Many of the visitors nodded, obviously recalling the moment that had set off all of this turmoil. Some even had photographic proof of the abuse that led to this revelation, videos of Juliet slapping me on their phones. Ethan whispered, "But that was different." But his voice lacked confidence. I could see some visitors exchanging disdainful glances as he made lame excuses, saying, "We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help." For the first time all night, I raised my voice and said, "You didn't know. You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home. You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge. You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate." With each response, Ethan's frame contracted. Carlos used the opportunity to retrieve another file from his folder. "I also have to let you know, Mr. Hughes, that your mother has changed her will. Every asset that was once intended for your inheritance has been transferred to organizations that work to shield elderly people from domestic violence." This declaration had the effect of a hushed explosion. Juliet stumbled backward as though she had been struck. "That is not possible." Her mask of calm finally came off and she let out a cry. "Your family is us. Your only son is Ethan. He cannot be disinherited due to a pointless argument, a pointless altercation." I said it again, allowing the words to linger in the tense atmosphere. "Does that sound like a familial plot to deprive an elderly woman of her house? Does striking your husband's mother on her own wedding day make sense in that context?" I could see several of the visitors flinching, and my voice had become cold. At last, Juliet's father, who had said nothing during the altercation, came forward wearing a poorly disguised look of panic. His tone was that of a man who had just learned he had placed a wager on the incorrect horse. "Mrs. Hughes, I think we're all a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down a bit." I firmly replied, "There's nothing to discuss in private here." In front of the same people who saw me humiliated, I had said what I had to say. "Since you decided to make this public, My answer will also be public. The visitors were engrossed in every conversation, moving their heads between us like they were watching a tennis match. With a dry crack that reverberated throughout the ballroom, Carlos closed his folder. All of the documentation have been given and discussed, Mrs. Hughes. The legal ramifications will start right now. Professionally, but with a certain joy, he turned to face Ethan and Juliet. I advise you to get in touch with your own financial and legal advisors very now. At last, Juliet passed out. She sobbed uncontrollably, causing the ballroom to reverberate as she literally collapsed into a neighboring chair. Through her tears, she whispered, "Everything is ruined. Everything we aimed for, everything we planned, everything is ruined." Her once pristine bridal gown was now rumpled and smeared with tears. I walked up to her for the first time since the smack and said, "No, the deception, avarice, and disrespect are destroyed. The idea that you can treat people like objects and expect no repercussions is what is destroyed." She had to look up when I stopped in front of her. When you mistake kindness for weakness, this is what occurs. Ethan approached his wife and touched her shoulder with a quivering hand. "We must figure up a solution, Juliet. We must be able to do something." However, I could see by the look in his eyes that he was aware that it was already too late. After a fire, some bridges cannot be restored. I looked him in the eyes for the first time in months without experiencing any agony, and I said, "There is a way to fix this. Ethan, you can learn from this. This can help you grow. You can become the people I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you." My voice softened slightly because despite everything, he was still my son. But that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. You will have to do it the hard way, like everyone else does. The ballroom remained in absolute silence, every person present knowing that they were witnessing the definitive end of a family relationship. Carlos and I headed toward the exit, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked guests and a newlywed couple, whose perfect world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. As Carlos and I walked toward the exit, the silence behind us was interrupted by a voice I didn't expect to hear. "Wait, Aurora." It was Lucy, Ethan's younger sister, who had been sitting at a table in the back throughout the confrontation. She ran toward us with tears in her eyes and an expression of absolute horror on her face. "Aunt Aurora," Lucy said in a trembling voice, "I didn't know anything about this. I swear Ethan never told me what they were planning with you." Lucy had always been my favorite niece, a 29-year-old who worked as a teacher and had maintained a close relationship. "If I had known what they were going to do to you, I would have tried to stop them." I stopped and looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same honesty I had known since she was a little girl. "I know, Lucy," I said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. "You have always been different. You've never seen people as opportunities or resources to be exploited." Her tears fell harder as she nodded, clearly devastated by her brother's actions. "But why did you never tell us about the money?" Lucy asked with genuine confusion. "Why did you keep all this a secret for so many years?" It was a question that deserved an honest answer, especially coming from someone who had always treated me with respect and genuine love. "Because your Uncle Robert and I learned a long time ago that money changes people," I explained as some guests discreetly moved closer to listen. Lucy nodded slowly as she started to see the wisdom of my choices. "We have seen families destroyed by inheritances, friendships ended by loans, and children who see their parents as walking pensions. We decided to live simply to protect the relationships that really mattered. However, Ethan used to be different. He would have stood up for anyone who wronged you when we were youngsters. How did he end up?" The anguish of a sister who had seen her brother change into someone else was evident in her inquiry. I said, sorry but not resentful. "What happened to him was, Juliet, he was the victim of ambition without morals, avarice masquerading as love, and my attempt to shield him, which prevented him from learning valuable lessons about accountability and repercussions." My response reverberated across the ballroom, where everyone was still listening intently. Throughout this conversation, Carlos had politely remained aside, but now he came over and whispered something in my ear. "The manager of the ballroom, Mrs. Hughes, is coming over. It appears that he is already aware that the guaranteed payment has been cancelled." Indeed, I saw a large man in a suit approaching us while holding a number of documents and wearing a grave look. "I just received a payment cancellation notice that is highly irregular. The contract for this celebration is guaranteed until tomorrow morning. Can you explain what's happening here?" said the manager, Mrs. Hughes, in a tense voice. His presence gave the crisis I had just sparked a new dimension of immediate reality. I said, "Mr. Martinez," recalling his name from our chats when I had surreptitiously set up the wedding payment. As Ethan and Juliet stood in the middle of the ballroom like dejected statues, I pointed to them and said, "The financial guarantee I provided for this celebration has been revoked due to extraordinary circumstances that have come to light tonight." With the perspective of someone who had managed social gatherings for decades, Martinez remarked, "I understand. And who will now be in charge of making the payment?" $53,000 is the total amount still owed, which covers the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photographs. His stern yet professional tone made it obvious that someone would need to find a quick solution to this issue. At last, Ethan responded, stepping tentatively toward us. "There must be a miscommunication, Mr. Martinez. My mother cannot just stop making the payment in that manner. We are related. This is solvable." I had never heard such despair in his voice, the despair of a guy who at last realized the seriousness of his predicament. "Young man," Martinez said with a professional's strained patience, "Mrs. Hughes personally and discreetly offered the financial guarantee. She is legally free to revoke that promise whenever she wants. I will now have to suspend the event unless someone can supply an alternate payment method right now." Juliet stumbled over, her makeup stained with tears and her wedding dress now entirely rumpled. She shouted at Martinez, "You can't do this. We are getting married today. Our wedding day cannot be ruined by financial difficulties." Her hysteria was so obvious that a number of people started whispering to one another in a growingly uneasy tone. Martinez's ultimatum landed on the ballroom like a final sentence. "Ma'am," he said, "I am not ruining anything. I am simply following the contractual terms that you signed. If you cannot provide an alternative payment immediately, I will have to ask all guests to leave and suspend all services." The guests' perceptions started to shift to the situation's actuality. Already, a few had begun to gather their belongings and make their way covertly to the exits. Some, like onlookers at a traffic accident, couldn't take their eyes off the drama that was still playing out. "Mom," Ethan whispered as he came up to me, crying for the first time since he was a young boy, "please, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but there are 130 people here. There are photos, there are memories. You can't destroy all this over a fight." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he had once been. "Ethan," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "I am not destroying anything. You destroyed this when you chose greed over love, when you chose manipulation over honesty, when you chose to publicly humiliate me, instead of treating me with the respect I deserve as your mother." Each word was like a dagger, but they were words that needed to be said. "But what are we going to do?" Juliet asked in a desperate voice, looking at the guests who continued to leave the ballroom. "How are we going to explain this? How are we going to pay for all of this?" Her panic was evident, and I could see she was finally starting to understand the real implications of her actions. "You're going to do what all responsible people do," I replied. "You're going to find ways to earn money honestly. You will learn how to make do with what you have. You're going to learn what it means to put in the effort to achieve your goals, rather than relying on others to do it for you." My voice had become more powerful, and I could sense decades of accumulated knowledge leaking out of my words. Carlos walked up quietly and whispered, "Mrs. The legal process is finished. Hughes, all documents have been delivered," and explained, "There is nothing more we can do here." His message was clear. It was time to leave, to let Ethan and Juliet face the consequences of their decisions without my presence as a distraction. Lucy approached once more and hugged me tightly. "Aunt Aurora, I want you to know that you will always have my respect and my love, no matter what happens with Ethan." Her words were like a balm for my wounded heart, reminding me that not all family had been corrupted by greed. "And you will always have mine, Lucy," I responded, hugging back. She soaked my shoulder with tears as she nodded, fully comprehending the lesson that was being taught to her. "Remember this night when you make important decisions in your life. Remember that character is defined not by what we have, but by how we treat the people we love." Martinez came over again, more urgently this time. "I require a prompt resolution. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't keep employees here indefinitely without a payment assurance because I have other obligations tonight." An already dire scenario was made much more stressful by the fact that his professional patience was finally running out. For the final time, I told Ethan and Juliet, "You have my phone number. We can talk when you're prepared to have an honest discussion about responsibility, respect, and values. When you understand what it means to work for what you want, and when you can look me in the eye and sincerely apologize for what you did to me tonight. However, after a close look at them, I added that you must first figure out how to clean up the mess you made here by yourself. After saying those words, Carlos and I turned to leave the ballroom, which was filled with chaos, hopelessness, and the brutal reality of well-learned consequences. Within 3 days of the wedding, my apartment had transformed into a peaceful haven that I hadn't known in years. After what he dubbed the night Aurora regained her dignity, Joseph had visited me every morning with coffee and pastries from the neighborhood bakery to check on me. My spirit had been blown away by his visits, which served as a reminder that I still had relatives that loved me for who I really was. For the past 3 days, the phone had been ringing nonstop. Ethan had made 37 calls and left messages that ranged from initial rage to frantic entreaties. Each of Juliet's 14 texts was increasingly frantic. Twice, her parents had knocked on my door, demanding that I clean up the mess I had made, but I had remained composed in a way that even I was shocked by. "Mrs. Hughes," he had said to me while we were sipping tea on my balcony. Carlos arrived that morning with news that, while expected, was devastating in its full scope. "Reports have reached me from every angle. Yesterday morning, Ethan and Juliet were forced out of their residence. Legal action has been taken by the ballroom due to non-payment. Their credit cards have been terminated." I had inquired, "And where are they living now?" Even though I already knew the answer. "With Juliet's parents," said Carlos. "Apparently, it's a 2-bedroom apartment where 3 people already live. The situation is tense," my sources told me. He seemed to be saying that the word tense was a pretty conservative way to describe reality. I noticed a familiar parking lot in front of the building that afternoon as I was watering my plants on the balcony. Lucy was there, but she wasn't by herself this time. Amelia, an old friend of mine from the real estate industry, was with her. I was shocked when Joseph exited the rear seat. Lucy called out, "Aura," from the pavement. I was immediately alerted by the intensity and anxiety on their expressions when they arrived at my place. "We need to talk to you. There are things you need to know." Lucy sat on my couch and held a packet that looked as official as the one Carlos had brought to the ballroom. "At Aurora," she said, "I've been looking into some things since the wedding night. Things I think you need to know before it's too late." Trying not to panic, I poured her some tea and said, "Too late for what?" For the first time, Amelia cleared her throat and spoke. "I've been researching Ethan and Juliet's financial status for the past 3 days. Aurora, I discovered more than any of us could have ever dreamed." Amelia went on, "They had been planning this for more than a year, revealing documents in the folder that filled me with nausea. I discovered proof that Juliet had been seeking advice from attorneys who specialize in matters involving senior mental capacity. They had a well-thought-out strategy to take over all of your properties and legally declare you incompetent." Joseph, who had said nothing up to that point, leaned forward solemnly. "There's more, Aurora. I heard Juliet on the phone with someone that evening after you left the ballroom. They still had a backup plan," she claimed, "even if the elderly woman had destroyed everything." I got a chill from what he said. A backup plan. I did it again, feeling a knot form in my gut from a mix of fury and terror. Lucy grasped my hand and gave it a light squeeze. "They've been telling everyone that you've gone senile, Aunt Aurora, and that the wedding scene was proof that you've lost your sense of reality. They are trying to convince a judge that you are incapable of managing your own affairs. Like an infected wound, the enormity of their betrayal grew before me. It wasn't enough that they had intended to take away my house, publicly humiliated me, and plotted against me for months. They were now attempting to use my legitimate reaction to their brutality as proof of my mental incapacity. It was more depravity than I could have ever conceived," Amelia said. "But that's not all," in a shaky voice. "The methodical nature of Juliet's slander campaign left me speechless. I've found out that she has been spreading rumors in the neighborhood about your erratic behavior. She has visited several of your neighbors, suggesting that they should report anything concerning they observe about you." At that moment, Carlos, who had come back for our planned encounter, walked into the flat and noticed the tense mood. "I noticed that some of the recent maneuvers have already been revealed to you, Mrs. Hughes." I had never seen such a serious expression on his face. "What your pals have found is confirmed by some other news I have." Carlos retrieved paperwork from his own folder and stated that Ethan had submitted a preliminary petition yesterday on the basis of what he describes as irrational behavior and unpredictable financial decisions. He is asking a court to assess your mental capacity. A number of witnesses who attended the wedding have given him sworn declarations. Sworn declarations? I inquired as I felt the shock start to give way to rage. What sort of claims? Before responding, Carlos reviewed his papers. Declarations detailing your unwarranted emotional outburst directed at a defenseless young couple. Statements that describe your financial choices as harmful and vindictive. Claims that you are no longer capable of making logical decisions. Lucy tightened her grip on my hand. They've persuaded a number of wedding guests to sign declarations. Aunt Aurora, the majority of them are not fully aware of what transpired that evening. They just witnessed an elderly woman assaulting newlyweds. She spoke with all the annoyance of someone who had witnessed the truth, but felt helpless to bring it to light. Joseph stepped in with a smile that sharply contrasted with the seriousness of the situation, saying, "But we have good news, too." He pulled out his own cell phone and showed me a screen that left me speechless, saying, "It turns out there are more people on your side than they imagine." I looked at what looked like a social media video with thousands of views and said, "Joseph, what is this?" "Aurora, can you recall how many visitors were filming that evening? A few of such videos have gained widespread attention. No one is witnessing an innocent pair being attacked by a senile elderly woman. They are witnessing a respectable woman come clean about years of mistreatment and deceit." Amelia also leaned in to check the phone. "The majority of the comments on these videos support you, Aurora. People are applauding your bravery, your ability to maintain your dignity under duress, and your choice to establish limits. Some are talking about their personal experiences with domestic violence. You've turned into a representation of opposition against elder abuse." Carlos gave a nod of approval. "If the matter gets to trial, this public reaction will be crucial. It's hard to claim someone is intellectually incompetent when thousands of others are praising their activities for their justice and logic. Perhaps the legal struggle wouldn't be as one-sided as I had first feared." As his professional smile had returned, I said, "But there's something else you need to know." After giving it some thought for the previous 3 days, I got up and went to my desk, where I had been organizing my own folder of documents, saying, "If Ethan and Juliet want to play this game, if they want to turn this into a public legal battle, then they are going to discover exactly who they're messing with." I've been corresponding with a number of attorneys who focus on elder abuse during the past 3 days. I have been keeping a record of everything: the threatening visits, the covert threats, the plot to take away my belongings, and even Juliet's slap. I pulled out pictures of my swollen cheek that had been taken right after the wedding, medical proof that the physical attack occurred. I went on with the resolve I hadn't had in decades. They will have war if they want it. However, I will fight the conflict with the truth on my side, on my terms, and with my resources. In addition, I added, with a smile that even astonished me, that I've made the decision to take action that I ought to have taken years ago. I will share my entire tale with the world. I'm going to demonstrate to the world what happens when greed masquerades as familial affection. There was a fresh spirit in the room, the vitality of individuals who were aware that justice was on their side, and that they had the means to see it through to completion. 6 months following the night that split my life into a before and an after, I was sat in the city's most significant television studio, awaiting the start of the interview that would convey my whole tale to the nation. After the wedding, films received over 2 million views on social media. Carlos was contacted by the Stories of a Lifetime program. My experience has turned into a nationwide emblem of opposition against elder mistreatment by family members. As the technicians made the last lighting adjustments, the journalist, Catherine Diaz, who was well known for her professionalism, went over her notes. "I want you to know that your bravery has inspired hundreds of people, Mrs. Hughes," she told me with a kind grin. "Over the past 6 months, we have received hundreds of letters from people who have experienced similar circumstances." A lot had changed. When Carlos provided proof of their plot to declare me incapable, the legal case that Ethan and Juliet were attempting to construct against me fell apart in a spectacular fashion. In addition to losing the case, they were ordered to pay $45,000 in attorney fees and fined for legal frivolity. The resulting bankruptcy was quick and disastrous. When his employer learned of the public scandal, Ethan lost his job. The viral films had destroyed Juliet's professional reputation, despite her attempts to launch an image consulting business. They were now battling to pay off their mounting debts, working part-time jobs, and living in a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. The program director said, "We'll be on the air in 5 minutes." I felt both anxious and determined as I gazed at the cameras that would soon Carlos was by my side, having consented to come and explain the case's legal issues. Amelia, Lucy, and Joseph Myrock, throughout these trying times, were in the crowd. Ethan's total silence had been the most agonizing aspect of these 6 months. He hadn't tried to get in touch with me since losing the lawsuit. There were no letters apologizing for his acts, no phone calls pleading for forgiveness, and no admission that what he had done was wrong. He seemed to have concluded that hating me was a simpler option than confronting the truth about his actions. Conversely, Juliet had made multiple attempts to get in touch with me. Her letters had changed from threats of legal action to frantic requests for money. Just 2 weeks ago, I received a final message that read, "Aurora, I know we made mistakes, but we're family. Ethan is sick with stress and I'm pregnant. Please, you can't let your grandchild grow up in poverty." The pregnancy news had been shocking. My grandchild would grow up in a household full of animosity toward me, but I was going to be a grandmother. But I had discovered the hardest lesson of my life. I was unable to save those who refused to be saved. Their damaging activity was only sustained by their attempt to do so. Catherine told me, "Mrs. Hughes, we'll start in 30 seconds. I inhaled deeply as I considered all the folks who had written to me with their personal accounts of familial abuse after watching the films. Elderly people whose kids had taken charge of their money, careless adult children emotionally blackmailed their parents, grandparents threatened to deny their grandchildren access to them if they failed to support them financially. Right now, we're in 3, 2, 1. The camera's red light turned on, and Catherine launched into a well-practiced introduction. "Welcome to Stories of a Lifetime, and good evening. Tonight, we have Aurora Hughes, a 68-year-old lady whose story has horrified the country and made family abuse of seniors a hot topic of discussion. My name is Catherine Diaz, Mrs. Hughes," Catherine went on, turning to face me. "How does it feel to know that your story has inspired so many people 6 months after the events at your son's wedding?" Catherine said. Her inquiry was straightforward yet kind, letting me get started at my own pace. I said, feeling my voice steady as I spoke, "I feel grateful. I'm thankful that something as traumatic as losing my relationship with my son has benefited others going through similar experiences. I felt alone and perplexed for months, wondering whether I was mistaken. I now realize that my experience is more typical than any of us would care to acknowledge." Catherine looked at her notes and nodded. "Describe the years before that night when you began to see that your relationship with your son and his fiancée wasn't working out." I had been waiting for that question, the chance to describe the slow, nearly undetectable development of financial and emotional abuse. I clarified that it began with little things, recalling those early warning indications that I had disregarded out of love, remarks about my advanced age, insinuations that I was incapable of caring for myself, and subliminal cues to make choices that would actually benefit them. Blows or yelling are rarely the first signs of family abuse. It starts by gradually undermining your self-esteem and making you doubt your own reality. In order to provide legal background, Carlos leaned forward. "The pattern Aurora outlines is a common one in cases of elder abuse. Before resorting to more overt kinds of coercion, the offenders, particularly when they are family members, employ psychological manipulative techniques. Because it is cloaked in affectionate care, it is pernicious." "When did you make the decision to reveal the truth about your financial circumstances?" Catherine questioned. I was prepared for the question, which asked me to justify the hardest choice I had ever made. "When Juliet slapped me in front of 130 people in the middle of the ballroom for not giving me the keys to my apartment," I simply responded. "The slap." I couldn't deny the fact that she had crossed a line. I realized then that it was no longer about shielding my family from the fallout from their deeds. It was about defending myself from more abuse. All facets of my tale were covered in the 45-minute conversation. I discussed my choice to live simply, in order to preserve my privacy, the years of covert financial assistance I had given, the plot to label me incompetent, and the ensuing legal dispute. Every response was intended to inform others about the warning signals and resources that are available. In addition to sharing my story, near the end of the show, Catherine said, "Mrs. Hughes, if your son is watching this interview tonight, do you have a message for him?" It was the hardest question, the one I hoped for and feared the most. I knew that Ethan may be watching, so I stared straight into the camera. "I want you to know that I still love you. Ethan, if you're reading this, you are my son, and for that I will always adore you. However, loving someone does not entail putting up with mistreatment. Giving up your dignity for someone else's convenience is not a sign of love. To love someone is not to fall prey to their avarice. I went on, feeling tears start to form in my eyes. The doors of my heart will always be open for you. However, only if you are able to overcome them, as the decent man I aim to make you. Only if you can face me directly and take whole responsibility for what you did. Only if you can demonstrate that you understand that love and respect, not exploitation and deceit, are the foundations of a family. Additionally, I added a message for the larger public in case any viewers identify with my tale. I want you to know that regardless of your age, you have the right to be treated with respect. You are entitled to make your own choices regarding your finances, residence, and life. Setting limits with family members that mistreat you is your right, and when those boundaries are crossed, you have the right to get assistance. The production team's cheers filled the studio as the cameras stopped rolling. Catherine gave me a tearful embrace. That was one of the most impactful interviews I've ever done. Aurora, it's going to change lives. Carlos nodded proudly, knowing we had achieved something bigger than winning a legal case. That night, as I drove back to my apartment with Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, I felt more at peace than I had been in years. I had told my story, I had defended my truth, and I had used my pain to help others. No matter what the future held with Ethan, I knew I had done the right thing. Aurora, Lucy said from the back seat, I am so proud of you. You have turned the worst experience of your life into something that will protect thousands of people. Her words resonated in my heart as we arrived home. The apartment that Juliet had once coveted now truly felt like a home again. Not because I had won a legal battle, but because I had finally learned to value myself enough to demand the respect I deserved. I had discovered that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it. And as I prepared for bed that night, I knew I had set the most important example of my life, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, that you are never too old to demand dignity, and that true love sometimes requires the most difficult decisions. My story had ended, but my life was just beginning again. 2 years have passed since that night that divided my life into a before and an after. As I write these lines, I am sitting on the same balcony where I used to water my plants and reflect on the silent humiliations I thought I had to endure out of a mother's love. How different the world looks when you finally find the courage to put a price on your dignity. The morning began, like all of them have for the last 18 months, with a call from Carmen, the coordinator of the Aurora Hughes Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. Yes, I decided to use my name for the charitable organization I founded with part of my redirected inheritance. Aurora, we have 23 new cases this week. Carmen informed me with that mixture of sadness and determination that characterizes those of us who work in this field. All similar patterns. Adult children pressuring older parents for property or money. Every case that comes across my desk is like looking into a mirror of the past. Yesterday, I reviewed the file of a 72-year-old woman whose daughter convinced her to sell her house for her own good, only to discover that the money financed a failed business and a vacation in Europe. The day before yesterday, it was a 69-year-old man whose twins emotionally blackmailed him. If you don't lend us $50,000, you will never see your grandchildren again. The irony is not lost on me. I have turned my worst personal experience into my most meaningful life purpose. The foundation has helped more than 400 seniors regain control over their finances. We have specialized lawyers, social workers, psychologists, and a support system that I wish I had had when I felt so lonely and confused. Joseph is still my dearest neighbor, although he is now also my foundation's vice president. His 72 years are filled with a renewed energy since he started giving lectures on how to detect family manipulation. Aurora, he told me last week as we were reviewing cases, I never thought my golden years would include becoming a detective for dysfunctional families, but it's the best adventure I've ever had. Lucy moved into the apartment next door a year ago. After her divorce from a marriage that had lasted only 8 months, she decided she needed to be close to the bravest person she knows. Working as the foundation's educational director has given her a purpose she never found in her career as a traditional teacher. Aunt Aurora, she tells me frequently, you taught me that sometimes real family doesn't come from blood, but from those who choose to respect you unconditionally. The success of my public story has brought unexpected consequences. The book I wrote, with the help of an investigative journalist, became a national bestseller. When Love Hurts, An Elderly Woman Fights Back, has sold more than 200,000 copies. and all the royalties go directly to the foundation. The letters I receive from readers are living testimonies that my experience resonated in thousands of homes where silence had been the norm. Carlos is still my financial advisor, but now he is also the foundation's principal accountant. His experience in handling the legal aspects of my confrontation with Ethan has become an invaluable asset in helping others in similar situations. Mrs. Hughes, he told me during our monthly meeting, we have recovered more than $3 million in properties and savings that abusive family members had illegally obtained. The question everyone asks me, the one that comes up in every interview and every deep conversation, is if I miss Ethan. The answer is complex and painful. I missed the child he was, the young man who had shown flashes of kindness and honor. I missed the illusion of the family I thought we had, but I don't miss the last few years of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and systematic disrespect. Ethan tried to contact me exactly 3 times during these 2 years. The first was 6 months after the television interview, when apparently some coworkers had seen the show and started treating him differently. The second was when his son, my grandson Oliver, was born 14 months ago. The third was 3 months ago when Juliet left him, taking the baby and half of their meager possessions. Each time he called, it was to ask for financial help, never to offer a genuine apology or acknowledge the harm he had caused. His pattern of thought remains identical. He sees his problems as external injustices, not as consequences of his decisions. The last conversation lasted less than 5 minutes and ended when he said, "Mom, your pride is more important than your grandson." I replied with a clarity that surprised me, "Ethan, my dignity is exactly as important as my grandson, and I hope that one day he learns that lesson better than you did." It was the first time I had ever hung up the phone on my son, and it was also strangely liberating. The topic of Oliver, my grandson, is the only one that can still make me cry. He is 14 months old and does not know me. When Juliet left, she took all the family photographs, including the few I had of him. I have created a trust fund for his college education, administered by Carlos, that will be available when he turns 18, regardless of the relationship we have by then. Maybe, Amelia tells me during our weekly dinners, when Oliver is older, he will seek his own answers about what happened in his family. Maybe he will find the courage to get to know his grandmother for himself. Amelia has become my closest confidant, especially since she also had to set difficult boundaries with toxic family members a decade ago. What surprises me most about these 2 years is how much my physical and mental health have improved. During the last few years with Ethan and Juliet, I had developed chronic insomnia, constant headaches, and an anxiety that kept me in a state of permanent alert. My doctor says my current tests show the stress levels of a woman 10 years younger. Aurora, Dr. Hernandez, told me during my last checkup, "It's impressive how the body responds when we eliminate sources of toxic stress. You have ideal blood pressure, you get restorative sleep. Even your posture has improved." He's right. I walk more upright, my voice sounds firmer, and my hands no longer tremble when I make important decisions. The flower shop where I worked closed a year ago, but I found a new passion in the community garden I helped establish in the building. I teach other older residents about medicinal plants and organic growing techniques. It's an activity that connects me with the earth and with people who appreciate accumulated wisdom instead of seeing it as obsolescence. My current routine includes 3 days a week at the foundation offices, 2 days visiting the homes of seniors who need emotional support, and weekends dedicated to writing my second book. This one will focus on practical strategies for detecting and preventing family financial abuse, based on the cases we have handled. The apartment that was once a source of greed is now a space of peace and creativity. I have converted each old room into an office where I receive people who need guidance. The walls are filled with thank you letters, photos of families we have helped reconcile in a healthy way, and diplomas from the universities where I have given lectures. One of the most rewarding experiences of this period has been becoming a mentor to other older women who are facing similar situations. Margaret, 74 years old, came to the foundation 6 months ago after her son sold her car without permission to pay off gambling debts. We worked together for 3 months, and last week she sent me a photo of her smiling in her new car, which she bought with her own savings after recovering the money legally. Aurora Margaret wrote to me in her letter, "You taught me that setting boundaries is not cruelty, it's survival. You taught me that self-love is not selfishness, it's a necessity. You taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." Her words reminded me why all this pain was worth it. Reflecting on these 2 years, I understand that my story does not have the traditional happy ending, where the whole family reconciles and we live happily ever after. But it has something better. It has authenticity, reclaimed dignity, and a purpose that transcends my personal pain. I have learned that sometimes the greatest demonstration of self-love is to walk away from those who insist on hurting you. If I could send a message to the past, to the Aurora who walked into that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I would say to her, have courage. It will hurt what is going to happen. But on the other side awaits a life more authentic than you ever imagined possible. Peace awaits you. The peace that comes from knowing you will never again allow anyone to treat you as if you are disposable. Tonight, as I finish writing these reflections, I look toward the future with renewed hope. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with senators to discuss new legislation to better protect seniors from family abuse. Next week, I am inaugurating the Foundation's 3rd Regional Center. Next month, I will begin a documentary series on this topic that will be broadcast nationally. My life at 70 is richer, more meaningful, and more authentic than it was at 68. I have learned that the end of a toxic relationship is not a loss, it's a liberation. I have discovered that true family is chosen as much as it is inherited. And I have proven that it is never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. When people ask me if I regret what I did that night, my answer is always the same. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See